it's almost disrespectful to put it in scientific terms. But these are people who were probably intubated, they were on a ventilator, and then again, a period of time on a ventilator normally has a bad outcome. The total losses, total number of deaths the CDC changed guidelines on how they want information reported. They want deaths, and then another category of probable deaths, which is a new category that's done by the local Department of Health or the coroner. So we're going to rationalize those new reporting requirements with local governments and get that information out as soon as we can. We're also, since we have a little bit of a period to take a breath, we're going to contact nursing homes and facilities to find out if there were other people who passed from COVID who were not necessarily in a hospital or in a nursing home, because there is a sense that there may be additional people who have passed away and they weren't included in the count because they weren't in a hospital, they weren't in a nursing home. So we'll be going through that. But basically, the healthcare situation has stabilized. The fears of overwhelming the healthcare system has not happened, thanks to the phenomenal work of our frontline workers, thanks to all the additional capacity that the hospital system created, over 50% additional capacity in 1 month. Just think of that. Thanks to the work that our federal government did, Army Corps of Engineers, providing the beds at Javits and Comfort. By the way, Javits, which is 2,500 bed capacity, is the overflow valve. About 800 people have gone through Javits. So thank you very much. And that was a great service that was done by the federal government in a very short period of time. So we have that stabilized. People are still getting infected, but we have the infection spread down to a manageable number. We've accomplished that. People are restless. We have to talk about the reopening of the economy. How do we do this? We have to build a bridge from where we are to the reopening of the economy. Well, what does that look like? Let's say that where we're going, it's not a reopening in that we're going to open what was. We're going to a different place. And we should go to a different place. And we should go to a better place. If we don't learn the lessons from this situation, this will have been in vain. We learned a lot if we're willing to open our eyes and open our ears. So we're going to a different place, which is a new normal. And we talk about the new normal. We've been talking about the new normal for years. We're going to have a new normal in public health. By the way we have a new normal in an environment, a new normal in economics, a new normal in civil rights, a new normal in social justice, right? This is the way of the world now. We're moving to a new place, more challenging place, but also potentially a better place. Well, when is this over? I say, personal opinion, it's over when we have a vaccine. It's over when people know I'm 100% safe and I don't have to worry about this. When does that happen? When we have a vaccine. When do we have a vaccine? 12 to 18 months. Who determines that? The federal government has to test the vaccine, FDA. It's a big gap, 12 to 18 months? Yes. I say the sooner the better. Anything we can do to work with the federal government to get the vaccine done faster, we are all in. You want to use New York State as a laboratory? We are ready, willing, and able. Any way the New York State Department of Health can work with the FDA to reduce that testing period, we are all in and energized and creative and ambitious about it. So anything we can do to accelerate that vaccine, we will do. You need a place to test it in large numbers, think of New York. But that's the ultimate end, right? We have a vaccine. Now we don't have to worry about this. By the way, we'll probably have to worry about the next public health risk at that time. So don't forget everything we learned. Besides the vaccine, there's a possibility that they develop a medical treatment. So we can't prevent you from getting the virus, but we have a new medical treatment. And if you get the virus, don't worry, it's no big deal. You go and you get this medical treatment. That's another way of having a natural end, right? And that's what convalescent plasma is all about, and the antibody testing to find people who had the antibody and then injecting the antibody into a person as a treatment method. Maybe the hydroxychloroquine works. Now, this has been a very politicized topic. I have done my best to stay 100 miles away from politics in all of this. Everybody wants to see hydroxychloroquine work. Everybody. Well, the president says he believes it works, but he's not a doctor. You're right. He says he believes it works, but he's not a doctor. Find out. Find out. And everyone hopes that it works. And anything New York can do to test it, we will. We are now testing hydroxychloroquine. There are a number of hospitals that are doing it. It's not a government decision. It's not a political decision. The medical doctor decides. And if a medical doctor decides it works, fine. We have an executive order that limits the prescription of hydroxychloroquine only because we don't have enough. And there was such a demand on it that people who needed it and were using it can't get it. So if the federal government sends us more, we will dispense more. It's a pure supply side issue. Or maybe they develop another drug that they figure out has an effect. That could happen between now and the vaccine, and we all pray that it does. But until you have the vaccine, until you have the medical treatment, what do you do? How are you building the bridge? Well, it's going to be a phased reopening, right? And during the phased reopening, the priority is make sure you do no harm and keep your eye on the public health issue. That is what is key in all of this. So it's going to be a calibration of reopening based on public health safety and that infection rate, because what we have done and the reducing of the infection rate is a pure function of what New Yorkers have done and what people across the country have done. When you relax that social distancing, you could very well see an increase in the infection rate. So it's all a calibration to the public health, but it's going to be a gradual increasing of economic activity in calibration with the public health standards. The single best tool to do gauging, right, is large-scale testing. Test, trace, and isolate. That's what everybody's talking about. What does this mean? It means you test, you find a positive, you trace back who they were with, where they were, test those people, and you isolate the people who are positive. It's inarguable. It's just very, very hard to do. And it opens this new world of testing. And this new world of testing is a new world to all of us, by the way. There's diagnostic testing. Are you positive or negative? There's then testing for antibodies. Were you exposed? If I find out that you were already exposed and you had the virus, now you can go back to work because you had the virus, you have antibodies. Antibody testing, once you have the antibodies, you can help develop convalescent plasma where they can take your blood, take those antibodies, use it as treatment. There's saliva testing, which is faster and easier. It's not blood testing, it's not a swab, it's just saliva, but that's a new form of testing that's just being developed. There's finger prick testing, which is less invasive, but also being developed. There's full blood sampling testing, which is obviously more intrusive. But to do the testing, you need testing equipment. You need swabs, you need vials, and you need all of these things at a capacity that does not now exist. Where do you do the testing? We've been doing testing in hospitals. Frankly, that's not a great place to do testing. You don't want people walking into a hospital emergency room who may be positive for COVID. Our drive-through locations are better. But how do you bring that to scale? All right? And then, even if you have the equipment and the testing site and the personnel to do the testing, where do you get the labs to test all of these tests? This is a whole world of questions that nobody has ever seen before. The bottom line is, well, you need large-scale testing. Let's do it. We can't do it yet. That is the unvarnished truth. I know because New York has been doing this since this started, exploring this new world. We have done more tests than any other state. We've done over 500,000 tests, which is more than the other states that are near us combined. Okay, so we've been very aggressive here. But in all this time, we've only done 500,000 tests. Now, that's a large number of tests. Yes, but this is over 1 month period. And even 500,000 tests. You're talking about a state with 19 million people, right? So you get a sense of the scale of what we have to do here. We cannot do it without federal support. And I've been saying this for days. If you have a state that has a lower need, yes, they may be able to do it. But when you have a state that has to do a large number of these tests, I'm telling you we can't do it without federal support. And I've said that from day one. We will coordinate, and we have been coordinating all the tests in our state. That's how we got to that 500,000 number. More aggressive than I think anyone else. We have 228 private laboratories in this state. We will coordinate with them. We'll make sure that we're not competing with ourselves because there are a lot of groups that are now testing. New York State Department of Health developed their own antibody test. And that test is going to be very important, and it's in our control because we'll actually do those tests. We don't need a private lab. We don't need anyone else. With those tests, it will go to about 2,000 per day capacity, and that is a finger prick test, so it's not terribly invasive. Even I can endure the pain of that one. We've asked the FDA to approve a state test that could get us to 100,000 people per day. To give you an idea, that's then 500,000 a week if you don't work the weekends. And I don't know if you do, and I don't want to raise something I don't know about, but 500,000 a week, we've only done 500,000 to date, right? So you get a sense of how powerful that would be if the FDA approves that. We're going to prioritize the antibody testing for first responders and essential workers. And this is important. We've all been saying thank you to the healthcare workers, and that's nice. But I've been talking to George Gresham through this. He's the head of 1199, which represents many healthcare workers. His point has always been the gratitude is appreciated. But we need support. The healthcare workers need support. They need the PPE equipment, and they need the tests to make sure they're not getting infected, or if they are infected, what is their status? And he's been exactly right. More than thank you, actions more than words, right?
You've been listening to New York Governor Andrew Cuomo providing his daily update here on Bloomberg Radio, mentioning that there are 752 deaths in New York yesterday for a total of 11,586 virus deaths in New York, up from the previous number of 10,834. The governor talking about building a bridge to the reopening of the economy, talking about ways to get to what's become known as the other side, says we will know that it really is over when we have a vaccine. Also says he's looking to a treatment, and anything that New York can do, it will. Quick check of the markets with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all declining right now. We have got the S&P 500 index slumping by 65 points. That is a drop for the S&P today, down by 2.3%. Dow Jones Industrial Average now down 517 points, a drop there of 2.2%, while NASDAQ is slumping 130 points, a drop there of 1.5%. Quick programming note, we will be hearing from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. We'll have that coming up in a matter of minutes right here on Bloomberg Radio. The 10-year, the yield now 0.65%. Crude oil dipping below $20 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.8%. Gold is down 0.7%, 17.15 the ounce. Recapping, S&P down 65, a drop of 2.3%. More on the markets coming up. I'm Charlie Pallett, Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury in the time of coronavirus. You've no doubt seen it on your social feeds, but with over 90% of the U.S. under some form of stay-at-home order, it seems like 100% of them have turned into avid home bakers. Sales of baking yeast are up 457% over last year, according to Nielsen data. Flour sales up 155%, baking powder 178%, butter 73%, eggs up 48%. In news of the rich and shameful, London jet setters who defied a COVID-19 lockdown to take a private plane last Saturday to vacation on the Côte d'Azur were ordered to return home by French police. The aircraft carried 7 men in their 40s and 50s and 3 women who were all in their mid-20s. The incident comes after skiers jetting in from London and other European capitals to mountain resorts in France and Austria have been found to be so-called super spreaders of the virus when they returned home. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
There are times when you have to go it alone, but these should not be those times.
Would the medical crisis in any other central bank execute?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Jonathan Ferro.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro in the coming months.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Do we have the ability to coordinate with this virus?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Right now, Doctors Without Borders medical teams are operating in some of the most remote and dangerous corners of the world. When front yards become front lines, at the crossroads of conflict and epidemic, where there are no hospitals, that's where we operate. Your response is critical to our response in places where few others will go. That's where we operate. Learn more at doctorswithoutborders.org.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellett. It is a down day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all declining today. Stocks are sinking, treasuries soaring on dire economic data. Stocks slumped as sour results from big banks and miserable economic data added to concern over a severe global recession. Here's where we stand. We have got the S&P 500 index trading lower now by 66 points, down 2.3%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 524 points, a drop now of 2.2%. NASDAQ down 131 points, down by 1.5%. I mentioned some of the bank earnings. Goldman Sachs down just about 0.1%. Bank of America dropping 6.3%. Citigroup lower now by 4.2%. Crude oil continues to move lower, taking oil stocks with it. ExxonMobil down 5.9%. Chevron down now by 4.8%. 10-year up 31/30 seconds. Yield now 0.65%. Gold down 0.8%, 17.13 the ounce. And with more on the commodity story, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
WTI is swinging between gains and losses after the International Energy Agency said an historic production cut deal won't be enough to counter a record demand slump this year. And gold prices are still trading near their highest in 7 years. Predictions of the deepest global recession in generations support gold. So do expectations for prolonged debt-fueled intervention by central banks and governments. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
And New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy has begun his daily briefing. Let's listen in.
Also joining us, per usual, the Director of the Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness, Jared Maples, Deputy Counsel Paramel Garg. One quick reminder that is off script, only given the date we find ourselves meeting, is before I go through our discussion, a quick reminder that although today is April 15th, your state tax returns are not due today. Pursuant to the legislation that I signed actually yesterday, you now have until July 15th. And the 3 months extension is automatic. You need do nothing. So just want to make sure I remind folks of that. Now, as we've done for the past couple of weeks, we want to get to the numbers up front if we can. Today we are reporting an additional 2,625 positive test results, and a total of 71,030 New Jerseyans have now tested positive. According to our online dashboard, accessible again through covid19.nj.gov, as of 10 p.m. last night, 8,000, and Judy, you'll correct me if I have this wrong, 8,270 residents were reported hospitalized, of whom 1,980 were listed in either critical or intensive care, and 1,705 ventilators were in use. 39 patients are at one of our field medical stations. And between 10 p.m. Monday and 10 p.m. last night, 709 residents were discharged from our hospitals, and that's good news. Additionally, we are now adding daily reports from our 3 veterans' homes to our online dashboard. We know these facilities are a specific point of concern, as they should be. God bless our veterans, and especially, obviously, for those veterans themselves who are living there. We must remain at all costs committed to them. These reports will be updated when the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs receives their data from these homes, I believe at approximately 3 p.m. So more on that as we get it. As we note every day, all of these numbers are just a snapshot in time. Overnight changes or late reports may not yet be reflective in the data that is posted. And remember, too, that for our healthcare facilities, this remains a very fluid situation. Sadly, and with the heaviest of hearts, we also have the duty to report another 351 deaths among our extraordinary New Jersey family due to COVID-19 related complications. The overall cost in lives to our state from COVID-19 now sits at 3,156 blessed souls. I do want to put a couple of numbers into a broader perspective, and Judy and I have hit this point, but I think it's worth hitting again. First, the number of deaths that we report on any given day does not mean that we lost that many residents literally in the past 24 hours since we were gathered. In some cases, these are residents who we have lost within the past several days, but the determination into the cause of death remains means that now we are counting them among our COVID-19 losses. There have been several reports in particular about the number of deaths announced yesterday. And while, yes, yesterday's number was our largest single reporting number, and today's is right behind, a significant number of these deaths occurred over the Easter weekend and are only now being reported. Is that fair to say, Judy? Additionally, the overall number of positive test results we report is cumulative since our first case was announced on March 4th. Of these, roughly 54,000 of the total of just over 71,000 have been reported in the month of April so far. And given that it's April 15th, and I think the experts to my right would suggest plus or minus a 2-week incubation period is still the expected reality with coronavirus, that means approximately 17,000 individuals have now exited that 2-week incubation period. Sadly, we've lost some of those folks, let there be no doubt about it, but it is a fact, plus or minus, that about 17,000 are outside of that incubation period. So as we see the daily overall number of overall positive test results rise, we should also keep in mind that every day there are hundreds, if not thousands, of residents who had received a prior positive test result who have now likely defeated the virus, and may it stay that way. These are just contextual aspects to these numbers that I think we should all bear in mind. They should not, however, be seen in any way as lessening either the gravity of the situation, the strain on our healthcare system and our state, or our need for preparedness. And they in no way ease the pain of the families who have lost loved ones and the communities who have lost people who made life a little better and a little brighter in all of the above cases. I'd like to remember, if I may, 3 such individuals today. First up, Eugene Gene Thomas. There he is on the right. Again, a guy known for his hats, and he's wearing a pretty cool one right there. He was a fixture in his beloved Ridgewood in Bergen County, where he lived his whole life. And here he is with Ridgewood Mayor Ramon Hash. He had just turned 78 a few weeks ago, I believe, on the day that he was admitted to the hospital. As his daughter Jackie put it, and I spoke to Jackie earlier today, even though some may not have known him personally, they always would see him in town walking down the avenue with his hat on and carrying his beautiful smile. He was also apparently somewhat famous for baking pound cakes. He worked in a dry cleaning business, but his love was music. Everything from gospel to blues. And the music he recorded in the 1960s is still played today. He leaves his daughter Jackie and her family 3 granddaughters and a grandson who is due next month. He's also survived by his brother, 2 sisters, nieces, and nephews, and a tremendous community of friends. I spoke to Jackie, as I mentioned. She is in Florida, and because of all that we're going through, could not even get up here to be with her dad. And so our heart goes out to her and her family and in his memory. Next up, Lieutenant Danny Francis. There's Danny. Nearly 16 years for the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. So to Ted Stevens and team at that office, our hearts are with you. After retirement, he kept going as a civilian analyst for the Newark Police Department. And to our brothers and sisters in the Newark Police Department, our hearts go out to you there as well. Danny was only 51 years old when we lost him on Monday. To know a little bit about his career, consider this. In 2006, he was recognized by the 200 Club of Essex County for valor in the line of duty for risking his own life to take down a known drug trafficker. He leaves behind his wife, Sarita Vega, and I spoke to Sarita as well this morning. By the way, she herself is a detective with the Essex County Prosecutor's Office. He leaves his wife, Sarita, along with 2 adult children, another who's in college, and a 6-year-old son. So on behalf of our state, we thank Danny for his career of public service and for his long-standing, excellent work to keep our neighborhood safe. We will keep him and his family in our thoughts and in our prayers. God rest his soul. And finally, we wish to recognize the legacy of Jacqueline Cruz Towns. And there she is on the right. Many may know her as the mother of New Jersey basketball legend and NBA star, Karl Anthony Towns, but she was much more. She was a family matriarch and an enduring and constant presence, not just in her son's life, but that of everyone who knew her. She also had spent, by the way, 20 years working at Rutgers University. Her husband, Carl Sr., also contracted COVID-19, but is recovering, and we keep him in our prayers as well. One story noted that it may have been Carl Anthony Sr. who taught his son the skills to play ball, but he got his emotional spark from his mom. She was only 58 years old. To Carl Anthony and his dad, and I spoke with each of Carl Anthony and his dad this morning, and their entire family and the broader basketball community, we send our deepest condolences. God rest her soul, and I can say today, without any doubt in New Jersey, we are all Timberwolves fans today. These are only 3 individuals out of what is now 3,156 lives that we have lost to this disease. We don't take any pride or joy in recounting these stories, saying these names and seeing these faces and knowing there are quite literally thousands more we can memorialize does not make our pain or your pain or any of our pain and grief any less. But these lives should be the inspiration we need to keep working to defeat COVID-19 and to lower the toll this enemy is having on our blessed state. I've said it many times before, we have taken among the most aggressive positions of any state in America to slow the spread of this illness. We have asked you to make tremendous sacrifices with us in this fight. I know some of them may seem like nuisances, but every step we have taken has been made out of sheer necessity. I promise you that. I'll turn to a map that we've been looking at every day recently. The lighter the shade of the county, the better it is. And we're getting New Jersey lighter and lighter, and that's a good thing. The less bright orange we see, the slower the spread. That means we're flattening the curve, which not only means we're keeping people from getting COVID-19, but that we're also lessening some of the immense strain on our healthcare systems. We're continuing to do everything we can to prepare for the absolute worst. As we've said, we've already been able to increase hospital capacity statewide, Judy, I think by 60%. We've set up 3 field medical stations in partnership with the Army, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and we've had beds set aside for our residents on the USNS Comfort. By the way, I mentioned this the other day. I want to put a name on this, who's captain, and not today, but at some point, Daniel, let's get Captain Joe O'Brien's picture up here. He's a New Jersey native, and as my son Sam reminds me, he is a graduate of Red Bank Catholic, by the way. Nothing, however, and I do mean nothing, would make us happier to come out of this realizing that we are over-prepared. That would be our new best-case scenario, the best mistakes we ever made in our lives. Because if we do, that means that you will have done the hard work of helping us pull through this. It means you took to heart our call to keep a social distance, not just most of the time or sometimes, but at all times, and to stay at home unless you absolutely need to go out, or unless you are needed as one of the folks who are either an essential worker or helping us fight this virus. This is a war. It is the fight of our lives. And wars are not won by one person or one small group. They're won when millions of people come together in a common cause. Our cause right now is totally flattening the curve and then seeing it drop down the other side. And then we can begin the process responsibly, along with our neighbors, of reopening our state and beginning to live life in our new normal. But we only get there if this entire map in front of us gets to its lightest shade and stays there. This is no time to let up. We have got to keep at it. And I just have to say this again, although I think the weather for the next few days is not going to be terribly hospitable, but it's going to be sooner than later. The weather will get better. All of us are anxious to break free. We completely understand that. We accept that completely. We can't. We have to stay home. Look at the progress we've made on that map. This is making a huge difference. That curve of positive test results, undeniably, 10 days now is increased at 10% or now meaningfully less. We need to keep it that way. We need to flatten that curve, which means fewer people get infected, fewer people in hospitals, fewer people in intensive care, fewer people needing ventilators, and please God, fewer people who pass. And as we continue to do that, Judy and Christina and Pat and all of their colleagues are building out that capacity of beds, healthcare workers, ventilators, medicines, personal protective equipment, again, so that those two lines cross at a reasonable level and at a reasonable date. That is the charge to the 9 million of us. So far, so good. No state has come close to what we've done in New Jersey. We could all not be prouder of the work that everyone is doing. We just got to keep it up. Don't take your foot off the gas, folks. Stay on this. I know you're itching to get out. You're itching to get back to normal. So am I. Who could blame you? We can't. We just can't yet. I promise you, the second we think we can, we will let you know that. You have my word. But for now, stay home. Stay 6 feet or more apart. By the way, I meant to say this, Judy. There have been some great homages. I saw one. Vingo Paul sent me an homage for healthcare workers gathering. Pat, you were on the text somewhere in Monmouth County over the past couple of days. So the good news is everyone had a mask on. The bad news is they weren't 6 feet apart. And again, I want to repeat, unless you and Dr. Tan disagree, that nothing trumps social distancing. 6 feet apart at minimum. Putting a mask on, even a crazy one like this, does not give you permission to get closer than 6 feet. So please, folks, we want to celebrate our heroes and healthcare workers, first responders, essential workers, warehouse, supply chain workers, longshoremen. We want to do that with you. But we got to stay apart from each other. We cannot congregate even if we're wearing a mask. Stay on it, folks. You've done an extraordinary job. We will win this war, unequivocally, but only if we keep at it. Please, folks, stay at it. Stay home, stay apart, keep your face covered, and we will beat this damn virus. Okay, switching gears. Good conversation this morning with Secretary Mnuchin. Talking about, again, the important need, the overwhelming need for support and financial help from the federal government.
Okay, we have been listening to Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey with his daily briefing, which included, once again, sadly, the number of people who have gotten the virus and also the number of people who have died in New Jersey. The governor overall said that we are making progress, but we have to maintain social distancing even with a mask, and he says that we will win this war. In the meantime, there's an important announcement for those of us in New York from Governor Cuomo, now saying that all people in New York must have a mask or facial covering. And he goes on to be specific, saying you have to wear a mask if you're in a situation where you cannot maintain social distance. Even, for example, if you're passing someone on the street, you should put the mask or some other form of covering over your nose and your mouth on. That is from Governor Cuomo. That will take effect this coming Friday. And now it's time for our market check, and for that we go to Charlie Pella.
All right, I thank you very much, David Weston. Here's what's going on. Stocks are slumping, Treasury surging as bleak retail, manufacturing, and home building data from the world's largest economy, the U.S., added to concern over a severe global recession. S&P 500 index sinking from a one-month high. S&P lower now by 53 points, down 1.9%. We've got NASDAQ down 107, a drop now of 1.3%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 391, a drop there of 1.6%. 10-year up 31/30 seconds with a yield of 0.65%. Gold is down now by 0.6%, $17.16 the ounce. Crude oil turning around, up 1.1% right now, back above $20 a barrel in New York. 20.33 higher now by 22 cents a barrel. After earnings, Goldman Sachs shares now up 0.9%. Bank of America down 4.9%. Citigroup also reporting this morning, down now by 2.8%. Bottom line, stocks lower across the board. We'll recap the S&P for you, down 53 now, a drop there of 1.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Well, we're getting a fuller picture now of bank earnings in the first quarter, with Bank of America, Citi, and Goldman Sachs all reporting today, and only Morgan Stanley among the big guys left to go. Here to take us through the bank story so far is Bloomberg Global Financial Reporter Shonali Basak. So, Shonali, thank you very much for being with us and for waiting through Governor Murphy's news conference there. So give us your sense about where we are with all these banks having reported. Is there pretty much a consistent story?
There really is a consistent story, and it gets worse by the day. Today we had Bank of America reporting, which is a very large view into the American consumer. And when you have Bank of America not just creating a large provision for loan losses, but also saying they're preparing for a recessionary outlook that can go well into 2021, you have to worry about the strength of the American consumer, not just in the next couple months, but what it might look like for the rest of the year and maybe into next year. year.
Yeah, it surprised me, actually, the chief financial officer for Bank of America saying the recession could last into 2021, because when I talked to Brian Moynihan a short time ago, he seemed a bit more positive of what they were forecasting after you get into 2021.
It was a similar situation at Goldman Sachs, where it was kind of a hope for the best but prepare for the worst kind of situation, looking at what it could look like if this were to extend longer. Now, those big consumer banks like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo are going to be much more impacted.
At the same time, a lot of these banks, there's something of an offset in the trading situation, because trading was way up.
The Wall Street businesses fared enormously well. You had skyrocketing trading at the big banks, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. But with that said, it wasn't enough to really get investors on board with what the longer-term outlooks look like for these banks. Bank of America shares down now about 6% today. Goldman Sachs somewhat flat. So the Wall Street focused banks are faring a little better than the ones that are focused on the consumer.
What comes next? What are we looking at? These are basically loan loss provisions, anticipating people defaulting, as I understand it. Citi particularly got hit, I think, on credit cards, didn't it?
It did, and credit cards was a big question mark over at JP Morgan as well. And then if you look over at Bank of America today, they said credit card and mortgage originations were down quite a bit. What happens next? Right now, we're in a situation where the banks know their responsibility. They know they have to step up and lend to small businesses and be there for the consumer and make sure that they're giving people leniency when it comes to their loans. But as the year progresses, that becomes more difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does, without a doubt. At the same time, as we look forward going out into the future, these banks are very well capitalized, right?
So liquidity and capital is not something that people are worried about with the big banks right now. But the big question mark is everything that's right outside of the banking sector. So you had Jamie Dimon worried about the non-banks that were exposed to the mortgage market. There's a huge debate in the mortgage markets on what should be done to really relieve some of the pain there. Wells Fargo, 30% of their commercial and industrial loans are exposed to non-bank lenders, non-bank firms. So it's not that there aren't some runoff effects.
Shelley, have you been also watching some of the regional or more local banks like PNC and people like that?
Yes, and those kinds of firms are even more pressured than the big ones. Like we were talking about before, a JP Morgan or a Goldman Sachs has a huge Wall Street business to lean on that is benefiting from trading volumes soaring. But if you're sitting in a scenario where interest rates are at record lows for who knows how long, and your entire business model depends on it, you're pressured on the revenue line, and then you're also pressured as costs start to rise.
Fascinating. But the banks, the equities obviously have taken a big hit right now, but they do have the ability to come back, right?
The bank stocks, you mean?
Yeah.
They do have the ability to come back. And again, the reason people are not getting in right now is because there's not a clear picture of what it looks like moving forward. Once the economy starts to open up again, then people might start diving in again, especially because we'll know then what the losses are. You know, the devil you know is better than the one you don't.
Yeah, that's generally the case. Thank you so much, Shelley. Always good to have you on with respect to the banks. That's Shonali Basak reporting for Bloomberg. Now we're going to turn to politics a bit. President Obama finally added his voice to the 2020 presidential race, releasing a 12-minute video yesterday endorsing his former Vice President Joe Biden and saying some nice things about Senator Bernie Sanders as well, but never mentioning President Donald Trump, at least by name. We welcome now John Nichols. He's National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation. John, thank you so much and for your patience in waiting as we've been trying to take some of these live news conferences. So John, why did President Obama wait to this point? And maybe on the flip side of that, why does he go now instead of we've been waiting longer?
Very good questions, both. President Obama is effectively the leader of the Democratic Party. Now it's an odd position to be in because he's handing it off to the person who will be the next nominee. But in some structural sense, a popular former president is always the dominant figure, the father figure, if you will, of the party. And so he waited until the nominating process was complete, or at least completed sufficiently. And then he played a very traditional role. There's nothing uncommon or out of sync with this. The very traditional role of calling the party together, of saying, now's the time to, get on board, start forging that next campaign. and effectively handing off that leadership role to Joe Biden. It was, by the way, also, I think that no matter what your politics, we can agree that it was a remarkably gracious and very carefully structured handoff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did watch it, and I think that whatever one thinks of President Obama, one would say he's always gracious, without a doubt. But it's interesting. He spent a fair amount of time, obviously, talking about the Republicans, as I say, not mentioning Donald Trump by name, but the Republicans and what they've done and what they have not done. He also spent a lot of time talking about Bernie Sanders in some very positive ways, saying we didn't always agree, but we always agreed on the basic goals we had, and really it felt like reaching out to the so-called Bernie bros.
There is no question of that. I would only counsel that I think it's Bernie bros and, frankly, a lot of Bernie sisters as well. Yeah. The truth of the matter is that, Sanders' supporters tend to be younger. They tend to be very loyal to Sanders. But many of them came of age with President Barack Obama. They may not have always agreed with him. They may not always have loved everything that he did, but he is a definitional figure in the lives, certainly, of anybody under the age of 40. And so I think he was speaking to Sanders backers, and he was also doing something else. I think in paying a great deal of kind words, offering a great deal of supportive thoughts toward Sanders, he was speaking to Joe Biden and to Biden's supporters and some of the more ardent centrists, if you will, in the Democratic Party. He was effectively saying to them, you folks need to grow up. You need to stop running around, giving high fives and saying, oh, we beat Sanders, and recognize that you need some of those Sanders people.
So, John, if this were a traditional presidential race, and it's not, given the coronavirus, it's not going to be. But if it were, right now we'd start talking about voter turnout and who can get out the base, and President Trump versus Joe Biden and things like that. But I wonder what that's going to look like. What is voter turnout going to look like? And we've had an initial skirmish in your home state of Wisconsin already in that presidential primary. Are we going to actually go to the polling places? How is this going to work? And how does that affect a strategy, either for a Republican or a Democrat, in this unusual year?
Well, it's interesting. Yesterday I was speaking at some length with Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and he was just talking about structural realities that have changed. For instance, he has to, in short order, start to collect his nominating petition signatures to get on the ballot for his own reelection. And he said, I've always done that going door to door.
Yeah.
I can't do that. And so literally the physical realities of a campaign and of a mobilization of voters for an election become different. However, and this is fascinating, you're right, I am rooted in Wisconsin. My family's been here for 6 generations. I've watched a lot of elections in Wisconsin. What happened on April 7th was chaotic, messy. The courts were involved, political parties pulling at one another. And frankly, it was horrible in many senses. You saw people, because of all sorts of structural challenges, forced to choose between doing what was safe and healthy, i.e. staying home, and leaving their home and going to the polls. So it was all of these problems. And yet, turnout was dramatically up from last year. Now, and competitive with some other recent presidential, up even from some other recent presidential primary years. And so the evidence is that while it's going to be messy and difficult, and frankly, while I think there are political players that may well try to mess with elements of the thing in very ugly ways, and I'm be very critical of the ways in which the courts intervened in Wisconsin. With all of that said, people seem to be quite excited to vote, and it's just a matter of how we make that possible. We ought to be thinking a lot about making absentee voting easier, doing a lot more early voting. There's reforms that ought to be done, but boy, the evidence from Wisconsin is they were, despite everything that was going on, they were desperate to vote.
Well, but the other interesting thing is, thus far in Wisconsin, the Republicans didn't seem to give an inch on the resisting the absentee voting.
Yeah, there was a real mess there. And the governor, a very moderate Democrat, tried to cooperate with the Republicans, tried to work with them, and they refused. But here's an interesting twist on it. They forced an election to take place, on April 7th with in-person voting, different from other states. And the presumption is that they were doing so because they thought they would benefit, especially in some down-ballot races, particularly a race for state Supreme Court, which was definitely a liberal versus conservative contest. Well, it didn't turn out that way. The liberal won by 160,000 votes. It was a 55-45 landslide. And so perhaps some of our Republican friends may learn a lesson from this, that it might be wise to let people vote in safety. And you might even find that some of your own voters, who often tend to be a little bit older and sometimes in more vulnerable health circumstances, they might like a chance to vote absentee.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly, as I say, it's not going to be like an election like any we've ever seen. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate you being with us today. It's John Nichols of The Nation. Coming up, Maury Obstfeld of the Peterson Institute is here to talk about coordinated financial relief to deal with the crisis. But first, we're going to go to Charlie Pellet for a market check.
A check of the markets, indeed. Here's what's going on. It is a down day. Red on the screen, David Weston. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all slumping. Treasury surged as bleak retail, manufacturing, and home building data from the U.S. economy added to concern over a severe global recession. S&P 500 index pulling back from a one-month high. All major groups dropping right now. Banks are falling as Goldman Sachs' investment portfolio took a hit from the coronavirus pandemic. Bank of America, Citigroup followed rivals in setting aside billions for loan losses. So here's where we stand right now. S&P 500 index is down 63 points, a drop now of 2.2%. Dow Industrials down almost 500 points, down 494, lower by 2.1%. NASDAQ down 125 points, a drop there of 1.5%. 10-year up 1 and 4/32 with a yield now 0.63% on the 10-year. Gold down 0.5%, lower by $9 the ounce at $17.17. Crude up 5 cents right now, up 0.3%, $20.15 a barrel. I mentioned the data on the U.S. economy, and those numbers portray widespread trouble for retailers and manufacturers, with businesses locked down and workers shut out by the coronavirus. And with more on the day's economic data, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Retail sales tumbled in March by the most on record as the pandemic forced thousands of merchants to close shop and left millions of workers without paychecks, at least 17 million so far, and rising. In New York, epicenter of the virus outbreak, manufacturing fizzled in early April at the fastest pace on record. Nationally, factory output dropped in March by the most since 1946, when war production wound up. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
After earnings, Goldman Sachs up 0.3%. Bank of America down 5.7%. Citigroup lower now by 3.8%. Recapping equities lower. S&P down 64, a drop there of 2.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 1061 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
It is a global pandemic, and it does raise a lot of economic issues, but it also, first and foremost, raises public health issues. The question is, what should we be doing in dealing with this global pandemic? How should we be coordinating across national boundaries? We bring in now Dr. Maurice Obstfeld. He served as the chief economist at the IMF. He's now professor of economics at the University of California, Berkeley, as well as a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. And he returns after having been with us for the first hour of Balance of Power as well. So, Dr. Obstfeld, thank you so much for being with us. Let's turn now to what should have happened with the global coordination of the public health aspects of this. You have a paper out from the Peterson Institute where you make a number of recommendations, I don't think any of which President Trump is following so far.
Well, thanks, David. It's great to be here. The World Health Organization is the central focus for international coordination on public health emergencies that affect the global community, including pandemics. And there have been criticisms of its response, to several pandemics in the past, but people acknowledge that it is the undisputed sole and valuable international resource in a situation like this, and countries simply have been acting on their own and not coordinating their responses very well in the course of this pandemic. I mean, one example is the export restrictions on medical equipment that have been put in place by the EU and by the United States, which not only hurt other countries but are ultimately self-defeating. So there's a lot of room for better coordination, and we will need a global effort on vaccines, on crisis response, on treatments to really bring this virus to bay.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about what we should do going forward rather than what happened in the past. But before, let me just go back to what President Trump said yesterday at the White House. Does he have a point that, in fact, China didn't necessarily play by the rules in disclosing everything they knew when they knew it about this virus?
Well, China was not fully transparent, and I think we'll need, and this is one of our recommendations, a strong retrospective study on what country responses worked best and how international coordination broke down. But they did notify the World Health Organization on the last day of December about an outbreak of a mysterious disease, and they provided the world with the genetic sequencing on the virus on around January 10th. So, while there was a lot of internal and external confusion about what was going on, and they certainly could have been prompter and clearer on that, there was plenty of warning for the global community. I think President Trump is looking for villains to blame, whether it's China or the WHO. And the fact is that by the end of January, certainly the scientific community, including the WHO, were sending very clear alarms about what was going on. Yet the U.S. response was very slow, as was the response, throughout Europe and elsewhere in the world. So I think retroactively we will really need to, take a hard look at national infrastructures for pandemic control and information sharing and strengthening the WHO's crisis response and its independence from individual countries. I think will be important in that effort. But defunding it seems like a very self-defeating action in the midst of a global crisis.
Maury, the nation states may not be playing particularly well together. As you mentioned, the EU and U.S. export restrictions on certain critical medical supplies. What about the scientific community? Are scientists basically cooperating with one another, or is there rivalry in developing a vaccine, in developing treatments?
Well, I think the scientific community always does a better job of communicating, and in fact, there has been accelerated publication of results that can be a plus and a minus, because you short circuit some aspects of the peer review process, and so there can be false leads. But the scientific community is really organized to share information and to publish information, so it's inherently going to do a better job in coordinating its particular role than governments usually do in theirs.
Is there any nation right now that is taking a true leadership position, or as a practical matter, is this virus, this crisis from the virus, really different from any others? Because every nation is worried so much about itself right now. It has to devote all of its time, attention, and resources to saving its own people.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that many, if not all, industrial economies have gotten themselves, with a few exceptions, such as Korea, into this position where they're in an utter public health crisis. But they do have to recognize that it is still going to be important for the ultimate success of their efforts, what happens abroad, and particularly what happens in the poorer countries, which are much less equipped to handle this catastrophe. If those countries become long-term reservoirs for disease, if they fail to get it under control, then the virus is just going to keep coming back throughout the world, and we'll have a much more prolonged public health and economic crisis than otherwise. So, governments need to look up from what's right in front of them, and to some extent, they're doing so. I mean, the G20 is meeting this week. Their health ministers will be meeting later on. Hopefully we will see some concrete actions by them.
Hopefully. Okay, thank you so very much to Maury Ostell of the Peterson Institute. Officials are starting to talk at least about a plan to bring the economy back to life. We're going to talk with the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Suzanne Clark, about how the chamber will help with a plan. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website, financial.com, and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
Are you interested in a challenge?
There are two sides to every story. From the epic tales of love and loss comes the huge new steady rolling single. When the Judgment Comes, the Elise Rich remix. Download When the Judgment Comes, the Elise Rich remix, or stream wherever good music lives.
When the judgment comes. Because you can't watch Trolls World Tour at the cinema, Sky Store is bringing the cinema home to you with Sky Store Premiere.
I'm going to destroy all music except for rock.
We need to unite the trolls to save all music.
Our brand new service that lets you watch movies at home that would normally be in the cinema.
Rock and roll! Let's go save the world! Yeah!
Prepare for battle. This ought to be good. Enjoy Trolls World Tour now on Sky Store Premiere, bringing the cinema to you.
For weeks, we've heard about panicked shoppers causing a run on toilet paper by irrationally hoarding it. But that ignores one key factor.
That the toilet paper you use when you leave the home is not the same toilet paper you use at home.
How incomplete information, whether about supply chains or infection rates, leads to incomplete narratives. Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC. Listen to the On the Media podcast from WNYC Studios on TuneIn today.
Hit the court anytime with these great NBA podcasts on TuneIn. The Low Post
So what struck you about this potential head-to-head matchup? What did we learn now that Zion is involved and LeBron and Zion go at each other for the first time?
You know, I still think both teams have to figure out kind of who are their guys when they get into a fourth quarter. I think you saw that with both of them. There were some kind of odd moments.
The Ringer NBA Show.
Who ended up winning the thing. But I did watch for a little bit when it was DeAndre Ayton and Zach LaVine playing against each other. And then as the days went on, Devin Booker was involved. Tell me you've seen the clip of Devin Booker when I can't remember who his opponent was.
Or the Haber Show.
At the end, it's because I worked in the NBA in the front office, and when I was 14 years old, my family moved back from Sudan to America. I jumped high school here in New York
Find these
City.
and more NBA podcasts right here on TuneIn. Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the Bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one, not only.
Catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn. Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind. Giving up, I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is,
or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is a down day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ are all declining right now. Stocks are slumping, treasuries are surging as bleak retail, manufacturing, and home building data from the world's largest economy added to concern over a global recession. S&P 500 index falling back from a one-month high. S&P 500 index, as I mentioned, lower now. We have got the S&P down by 63 points, a drop of 2.2%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 491 points. That is a drop of 2.1%, while NASDAQ lower now by 120 points, a decline there of 1.4%. After earnings this morning, Goldman Sachs shares, they're advancing now by 1.1%, while Bank of America is down 5.4%. Citigroup shares lower now by 4.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude flat now at $20.11. Major energy companies, though, the oil majors trading lower. ExxonMobil, for example, dropping 5.3%. Chevron lower now by 4.2%. Again, the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ are all lower. Gold is down 0.5%, $17.18 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude flat at $20.12. Recapping on the equity markets here, S&P 500 index down 62, a drop of 2.2%. The Dow down 2%. NASDAQ lower by 117, down 1.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. From New York, this is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Well, President Trump is putting together various teams of White House officials and business leaders to try to help him figure out a plan for getting the U.S. economy started once again. And We have been talking about the need for testing, particularly to help that get done, so we know what the risks are, who has it, who doesn't have it, how we can isolate them. We also talked about possible differences geographically about who we bring in. And we welcome now our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide, and we're going to talk with Suzanne Clark. She is the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and she's here for a very important purpose because she has a new program. The Chamber has a new program to help the president figure out how exactly to get the economy started again. Suzanne, thank you so much for being with us. Please tell us about your program. Describe it for us.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, David. And look, the Chamber's lucky. We have a unique vantage point. We have members in every sector and of every size. And through a great network of state and local chambers, we touch every geography. So we have put out a call to all of those members so that we can get their input, their questions, their concerns, to develop a framework so that we can guide both policymakers and businesses so they're ready to reopen.
And exactly how will the process work and how long will it take? Do you have any sense?
I think there's no precedent for this, right? There's no playbook either for the public health crisis or for the economic crisis. We know we're looking at new processes, that CEOs will have new restrictions, that there'll be new requirements, and even new risks. So every CEO is asking those questions. And in terms of how long it takes, the better we are at the planning phase, the faster that CEOs can move when they get the green light. Because we know what a job means to a family and to a community and to family health and to community health. And so if we do the right planning now, we'll be ready faster when we get the green light.
How does this fit together with what is going on at the White House? Because as I said, he has a group of White House officials, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. His daughter is involved, as I understand in this. But then he has a large group of business executives that he said he's going to be consulting with. How does this all fit together?
Well, it's really terrific, right? The more minds we have at the table who can help figure this out, the better, right? Especially in something that's so unprecedented. The task force that the administration has put together is filled with phenomenal names across a bunch of sectors, a lot of our really good members and friends. And if you look at it, it's organized by sector. So in our work, which touches the whole economy, we've been working with the White House directly on the overall framework and guidelines, and then with our members in each of the sectors on the task force about the specifics.
As I understand it, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, where we've ended up after a bit of back and forth between the White House and some governors is President Trump will announce some guidelines for this, and then it'll be up to the governors to implement. Is that your understanding as well? Is that the way it should work?
David, I think you make the right exact point, which is that this is going to be a multi-layered path to recovery. And if you look at what we've seen in the past during this crisis, this is exactly what's happened. You've had federal guidelines and then local decision-making. So an example would be the White House defining essential businesses, the CDC then putting out guidelines about how you protect those essential workers, and then states implementing policies specific to their on-the-ground conditions. So it's exactly the playbook we've seen before, and we've seen it work.
Yeah, it's fascinating. At the same time, we have to be informed, obviously, about the healthcare professionals. And what we hear from them consistently, whether it's CDC, we need to have a lot more testing. Do you have a sense at the Chamber of whether that testing is around the corner?
Well, we certainly hope so, and we believe in the innovation of the companies hard at work at it. And as you see and report on, we see new innovations every day. I think the testing matters not only about the virus itself, but also about the serological testing that can tell us who's already immune. And if you think about getting back to work, the testing is important, the tracing is important, but then the next phase of what equipment are CEOs going to need? Are they going to need thermometers? Are we going to be passing out masks? Do we have to train people on how to use that equipment? All the way through, how is childcare and transit going to work in an era of, even when you get the yellow light to go back, the green light to go back, it's certainly going to mean, continued social distancing.
It's a fascinating point you make, Suzanne, because I don't think I certainly have started to think about all the various ways this could affect our lives going out into the future, at least until there's an effective vaccine that's widely distributed. We heard from Gavin Newsom, the governor of California yesterday, just suggesting some of the things that could happen with restaurants, whereas you said you'd have a thermometer, you'd have disposable menus, you'd have tables spaced much more widely apart. That could permeate every part of American business.
I think that's right. And then there's the underlying consumer sentiment. When do people feel safe? When are they ready to return with demand? What happens with this pent-up demand? I think the place to be optimistic is that we're an innovative company. We're already a country, and we're already seeing ingenious solutions to these things. And I never counter bet against American entrepreneurs and what the ways that they will figure out to solve this problem. And that part's kind of the golden silver lining to watch.
Do you envision, Suzanne, that as a result of this Path Forward program from the U.S. Chamber, you will issue a report, or is this going to be, as they say, iterative? That is to say, just going on and going back and forth?
I think both things are true. I think they have to be constant reports and the most timely help that we can give people. If I fall back a second, one of the ways that we could be the most helpful in the emergency phase was that as government assistance and funds and grants and loans became available, we were able to immediately produce guides to put out to, I think our last count was 3 million downloads on our website, small businesses accessing information intelligence about what to do. Now you're watching these same CEOs, small and large, turn to, okay, where do I get information to start to think about not just the testing and tracing, not just the equipment and training, but also the best practices. One of the things that we hope to issue sooner rather than later is a look at the essential businesses and what they're already doing. What can we learn from them?
And Suzanne, we'd love to have you back on to talk about just that. That is Suzanne Clark. She is president of the United States Chamber of Commerce, talking about her new Path Forward program to get the economy back up and running, relying upon all of her membership. And that's going to do it for Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio for today. It's been a long day. Risk off in the markets. Banks continue to report the effects of the economic downturn. We got some really disappointing U.S. economic data, both retail sales and factory output.
Daybreak.
There are two sides to every story. From the epic tales of love and loss comes the huge new steady rolling single. When the Judgment Comes, the Elise Rich remix. Download When the Judgment Comes, the Elise Rich remix, or stream wherever good music lives.